My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, echoing in the grand emptiness of the hall. Above me, chandeliers glittered like constellations, scattering light across polished tables dressed in ivory linen. My name, Madison Blake, owner, gleamed proudly on the brass plaque at the entrance. Even now, after months of signing that ownership deed, it still felt surreal. Owning this place wasn't just business. It was poetic. A full-circle moment carved out of scars I once hid. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse, the smooth fabric cool against my wrist, when my phone buzzed inside my clutch. A notification flashed across the screen, an RSVP list for tonight's gala. My assistant had sent it for approval. I scrolled through the names. Familiar ones. Too familiar. People who once dismissed me, ignored me, laughed at me. People who, years ago, couldn't be bothered to show up when I had extended an invitation. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening, though not with pain, this time with irony. The same people who refused me then were about to celebrate under my chandeliers on my floors, in the hall I now owned. And I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't always the woman who could stand in a place like this. Back then, I was just a 21-year-old college senior with big dreams and very little proof that they were worth believing in. I wanted to celebrate my graduation, something small, intimate, meaningful. I didn't have much money, but I poured everything I had into renting a cozy little space downtown. Fairy lights, handmade decorations, cupcakes, I stayed up all night baking. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And I invited the people who mattered most to me, friends, classmates, even some family who lived nearby. I remember staring at my phone as I typed out those messages, fingers trembling because it felt like an important step. Hey, it would mean the world if you came. One by one, the responses trickled in. Excuses. Busy schedules. Some didn't even bother to reply. A few laughed it off, saying things like, "Why throw a party when you don't even have a job lined up?" I tried to smile through it, but the words stung like splinters under my skin. The night of my graduation, the little hall I had decorated so lovingly stood nearly empty. Just me, a couple of balloons wilting in the corner, and the echo of music from a speaker that seemed too loud for the silence around it. I remember sinking into a chair, staring at the untouched cake. My throat burned as I blinked away tears, trying not to smear the makeup I'd spent an hour perfecting. That was the moment the humiliation sank in, not just that they hadn't come, but that I hadn't been worth coming for. Then, as I sat there, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from my grandmother, the one person who had never doubted me. Her voice, soft but steady, filled the lonely room. "Maddie, don't measure your worth by who shows up. One day, they'll wish they hadn't missed standing by your side. Remember this, you don't need a crowd to prove you shine. Build your own stage, and they'll have no choice but to see you." I clutched the little silver locket she had given me for graduation, her words sinking deeper than the sting of rejection. That night, in the quiet of an empty hall, I made myself a promise. I would never wait for their approval again. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for people to show up and started showing up for myself. The very next week, I applied for a part-time job with a local catering company. It wasn't glamorous, lugging crates of glassware, hauling tables in and out of vans, serving hors d'oeuvres with a forced smile. My feet ached, my nails chipped, and my hands smelled of bleach from endless cleanup. But I didn't quit. Because while others saw a low-paying gig, I saw a doorway into an industry that fascinated me. Every event became my classroom. I studied everything: how the florists arranged centerpieces, how the event planners coordinated schedules, how the lighting transformed an ordinary room into something magical. I wrote notes on napkins during breaks, stored ideas in my phone, and dreamed of one day running things my way. It was during one of those exhausting nights, scrubbing wine stains off a rented tablecloth, that I met Evelyn Grant. She was a seasoned event planner in her 50s, confident, sharp-eyed, with a laugh that could command a room. Unlike others, she didn't just see me as the help. She noticed how I lingered, observing details, asking quiet questions. One evening, she pulled me aside. Madison, you've got an eye for this. You don't just see a room. You see the story it could tell. That's rare. Don't waste it. Her belief lit a fire in me. Under her guidance, I learned the craft of event design, the art of negotiation, the patience needed to deal with difficult clients. She became my mentor, but more importantly, she became the first person, outside of my grandmother, who truly believed I could do something great. Still, the road wasn't easy. There were nights I went home with my shoes falling apart, my rent overdue, my fridge half empty. There were moments I doubted myself, staring at rejection emails from potential clients who thought I was too young or too inexperienced. More than once, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by sketches and invoices, wondering if I should give up. But then, the small wins began to stack up. My first independent gig was a modest baby shower. The family hugged me with tears in their eyes, saying it was more beautiful than they imagined. My second was a small corporate dinner, nothing fancy, but I nailed every detail. Slowly, word spread. My reputation grew, one referral at a time. I posted little about my work online, just vague snapshots of flowers, lights, or empty halls. Never enough for my old friends or family to realize how far I was climbing. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. My success was mine, private and sacred, like a seed I was protecting until it bloomed. Years passed. Contracts grew larger. Clients grew wealthier. By 28, I had saved enough not only to start my own company, Aurora Events, but also to begin bidding for properties. And when the chance came to buy the very hall where I had once sat heartbroken and alone, staring at an empty room, I signed the papers without hesitation. That place, once a symbol of rejection, was now my empire's crown jewel. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of glow that only comes from months of planning. Golden lights cascaded down velvet drapes, crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers, and the air hummed with the sound of a string quartet rehearsing softly in the corner. Every detail bore my signature, the Madison Blake touch that clients now paid top dollar for. I stood near the back entrance, half hidden, adjusting the strap of my satin dress. My staff buzzed around me, finalizing details. But my eyes weren't on the decor. They were on the guest list in my hand. The names leapt out like ghosts from another life. College friends who once had better plans, cousins who rolled their eyes at my ambitions, even a professor who told me event planning was a hobby, not a career. They hadn't known when they RSVP'd. To them, I was just another vendor, another shadow behind the scenes. I waited. One by one, they arrived. Laughter spilled through the entryway as they gawked at the elegance of the hall. "This place is incredible," I overheard one of them say. "I wonder who owns it." I smiled to myself, the irony sharp and sweet. Later that evening, Evelyn, still my mentor and now my partner, stepped onto the stage to welcome the guests. She introduced our company with pride, her voice commanding the room. And then, like a drumroll building in my chest, she turned toward me. "And now," Evelyn announced, "it's my honor to introduce the woman who made tonight possible. The owner of this beautiful hall, Madison Blake." For a heartbeat, silence. Then, head swiveled, eyes widened, and whispers rippled through the room. I walked forward, heels clicking against the marble, every step measured, every breath steady. The shock on their faces was everything I had once imagined, and more. My old roommate, who once laughed at my silly little party, nearly dropped her champagne flute. My cousin, who ignored my graduation invite, sat frozen, her mouth half open. Even my former professor shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie as if that could hide his disbelief. I let the silence linger before speaking. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm but firm. "When I graduated college, I threw a small celebration. I invited many of the people in this room tonight." I paused, scanning faces. Almost no one came. A murmur passed through the crowd, a shuffle of feet, a cough here and there. At the time, it broke me, but it also built me. Because in that empty hall, I realized something important. I didn't need anyone's approval to celebrate myself. I didn't need a crowd to validate my dreams. What I needed was determination. And I found it. I let my words settle. Their eyes darted between me and the glittering chandeliers, the polished marble, the hall that now bore my name. So tonight, I continued, my tone softening, as you enjoy this evening, remember this. You stand beneath the lights of a hall you once refused to step into. Only now it belongs to me. A hush fell over the crowd. Some faces flushed red with shame. Others looked down, unable to meet my eyes. But there were a few, just a few, who looked at me with something new in their gaze. Respect. Maybe even admiration. And in that moment, I wasn't the girl whose invitation they had refused. I was the woman who owned the stage. The applause that followed was hesitant, scattered, like people weren't sure whether to clap or to sink into the floor. I didn't need their applause. Their silence was its own confession. I walked down the steps, weaving through the tables, stopping where familiar faces sat. My voice stayed steady, my smile calm, but my words carried weight. I turned first to Claire, my old roommate, the one who once laughed at me for wanting to throw that graduation party. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes darting nervously. "Claire," I said softly, "you once told me my dreams were too small to matter. Tonight, I'd like to ask you something. When was the last time you supported someone else's dream instead of dismissing it?" Her eyes welled, and she nodded, unable to speak. I moved on to Daniel, my cousin, who had ignored my messages all those years ago. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at his sleeves. "Daniel," I said, "family isn't about convenience. It's about showing up when it counts. I don't need an apology. But I do hope you learn to be present for the people who love you, not just the ones who can benefit you." He swallowed hard, shame flickering across his face. Finally, I stopped in front of Professor Harris, the man who once told me event planning was nothing but a hobby. His brows furrowed as if bracing himself. "Professor Harris," I began, "you taught me something valuable, though not the way you intended. You taught me that doubt, other people's doubt, can be fuel. But I want to ask you to reflect on this. How many students' dreams have you crushed with careless words? How many futures dimmed because you couldn't see beyond your own definitions of success?" The room was still. His lips parted, but no words came. For once, the man who always had answers was speechless. I straightened, my voice carrying through the hall. Tonight is not about revenge. It's about perspective. I don't need apologies, or validation, or excuses. What I want is simple. The next time someone around you reaches for something, whether it looks small or impossible, don't dismiss them. Don't refuse their invitation to believe in themselves. I paused, feeling the weight of my own heartbeat. My conditions aren't written on paper. They're written in how you choose to live after tonight. Show up. Believe. Support. Because success doesn't need an audience, but people do. There was no cheering, no thunderous applause. Just silence, thick and heavy, the kind that comes when truth pierces deeper than pride. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with peace. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And remember, you're standing in a hall that once echoed empty because of you. The difference now is that I don't need you to fill it. I've already filled it myself. With that, I turned and walked toward the back of the room, every step echoing louder than the applause I didn't ask for. When the night finally wound down, the hall grew quiet. The string quartet packed up their instruments, the last champagne glasses were collected, and soft music faded into silence. I stood near the back doors, gazing across the room as guests trickled out, some avoiding my eyes, some pausing just long enough to murmur a quiet congratulations. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the old sting of rejection. Instead, I felt something lighter, like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying since that empty graduation night. I slipped my hand into my clutch and pulled out the little silver locket my grandmother had given me all those years ago. The metal was cool against my skin, and as I opened it, her smiling picture stared back at me. I could almost hear her voice. "Build your own stage, Maddie, and they'll have no choice but to see you." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude, for the pain that pushed me, for the resilience that carried me, for the woman I had become. I thought of Claire, Daniel, even Professor Harris. Maybe tonight planted something in them too. Maybe they would go home and reconsider how they treated people. Maybe they would finally learn to show up. And even if they didn't, that was no longer my burden to carry. What mattered was this: I had built a life where I no longer needed anyone's approval to feel worthy. The girl who once sat alone in an empty hall had grown into the woman who owned one. I fastened the locket around my neck, letting it rest against my heart, and looked one last time at the chandeliers glimmering above me. My reflection in the polished marble floor didn't look like someone seeking validation. She looked like someone who had finally stepped into her power. With a deep breath, I turned off the lights, the hall falling into a gentle darkness behind me. And as I pushed open the heavy glass doors, I whispered the truth that had carried me here. They once refused my invitation. Tonight, they stood beneath the chandeliers of the hall I own.